President Trump is trying to end birthright citizenship, and Elon Musk is trying to strip down the federal government like he did with Twitter. Where does executive authority begin and end? We'll try to explore that question in the second episode of The Echo Chamber. For a future beyond today's narratives, welcome to The Echo Chamber. And we're back with Chris Miller to help me on the second episode. How's it going, Chris? How's your week been?
Busy. I put in like 36 hours of work before Tuesday, but through Tuesday.
Nice.
And then I'm still working a little bit each day right now.
Joys of capitalism, right?
Everything. What?
Joys of capitalism, yeah. Right?
Yes.
So first step, I think, is looking at the Constitution and determining, based on that, where President Trump's authority begins and ends. The first thing we're going to look at is Article 2 of the Constitution, Section 1, which starts with, "The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America." So, the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch. What does that mean? Chris, what does it mean to you that he is the executive head?
So the executive branch is essentially the branch of the government that is like the manager of the laws. And so the executive manages what is set forth in front of them. And so they have I guess if we're just talking what the executive is, it has very specific powers. It has slightly less domestic powers than it has international powers, because the executive branch essentially has almost carte blanche interaction between other countries other than war and certain treaties over our interaction with other countries. And it also has certain powers over interstate travel, or commerce, and I don't know, there's something else that falls under that category. But for the most part, the executive is specifically not like a king or a monarch. It is there to execute what Congress decides.
Yeah. And I've been meaning to spend more time actually really studying the Constitution, but I have yet to do that. But as I was reading through sections of it in preparation for tonight, I noticed that it had a lot of verbiage to the tone of the president is to uphold the law or to enforce the law. And so it's meant to take the law that Congress creates and figure out how to effectively enforce that. And he does that through managing the executive. But it's not always such a clear line. And there's a lot of overplay, it seems, because a lot of the jobs that the executive branch actually fulfills is actually fulfilling the obligations that Congress has, from what I was reading. And so and Congress is, and we're going to be covering this shortly, Congress is actually responsible for creating a lot of these agencies. And then so the executive then manages them. And manage is going to be what we're going to have to explore, because that definition has been legally disputed, not specifically managing, but what authority the president has and how he manages the executive branch. So because I have dyslexia and I'm horrible at reading, I'm going to have Chris read Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, which will give us a little bit more insight as to what authority the president actually has.
Which, ironically, I am also dyslexic.
There you go.
I just have a little bit more experience, and I've already read through it like twice.
Nice.
So that helps. So, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. He shall have power, and by and with the advice and consent of Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls. Oh, yeah. Judges of the Supreme Court and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law, but the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments.
So this, I think, is where, yeah, where it gets to be a bit of a clincher as far as because it's talking about uh, the executive, the president is meant to appoint these officers that are in charge of heads of departments in the executive branch, but he is to do so with the consent of Congress, and that's where we get the confirmation hearings. Um, Now, the part that is interesting to me, and I wish it was worded differently, and that's what happens when something is worded, in legalese from hundreds of years ago or 100+ years ago. Um, you've got this wording that says the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. And so I think one of the and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the interpretations of this is that the president, based on this, can uh, put lower officers in, but not officers that have too much authority.
So
Yeah,
inferior officers, as far as my understanding, and I could be a little bit off on this, I haven't like actively looked into this in a while, are things like deputy or acting directors. So not deputy directors. Deputy directors are their own thing, but acting directors. So for example, if Congress or the Senate is not in a position to put anyone into that position and say someone resigns or they get fired or insert whatever reason they are not there, they die, uh, he is allowed to put somebody in place like an acting director, but they are only available to stay in that position without Senate confirmation for like up to 210 days. I don't know why that number exactly rings a bell, but that sounds right to me.
okay.
There's also some other inferior officers, which are, and I might be pulling this one out of my ass, uh, but they essentially are just like stand-in officers or for positions that don't really have a solid place yet, but they don't have full authority, as if like an acting director does or a director. And that also means that like the inferior officers aren't held to the exact same Senate confirmation style hearings and stuff like that, but they also don't have the same authority.
Gotcha. So, and this is where the controversy comes in with DOGE, Elon Musk, because he is either taking or projecting a degree of authority that a lot of people are associating with a position that would need to be confirmed by Congress.
Yeah. However, that was until yesterday when they finally announced that there is an acting department head, Amy Glacier. I'd have to
Yep.
re-look it up. Glacier, I think. I don't know how to
Yep.
pronounce it, so I might be wrong.
I loved your text message that you sent me on that because you said, I wonder if she knows that she's the head of the department, because
Yeah, it was
the
announced
assumption.
while she was on vacation in Mexico, so I don't know if she even knew. I mean, she worked under Trump in the last administration. I don't remember. I think it was actually in the Department of, well, what DOGE used to be, which was the United States Digital something or other. I'm missing my acronyms at the moment.
Yep.
But so she was a part of that group in the last administration, but that actually adds a whole new extra level of, since they changed the name and the purview of this department, is this
Yep.
department even
Legit.
like technically constitutional?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean,
Uh,
they have some amount of authority, but I don't know. Like, you can't just create a new one, but since they're just changing the purview because the United States Digital Services was only designed to improve the technology and improve the user interfaces for both citizens interacting with the government, like websites and other stuff. And it was also designed to help improve the interface of the federal workers and the governmental agencies.
Yeah.
So it was technically some kind of digital efficiency, but it wasn't under any situation supposed to be some kind of advisory committee that had the authority to tell people to fire people or anything like that. If they were just working on websites and the backbone infrastructure of the government.
My understanding is that was an Obama initiative, was it not? I believe so.
I believe so, but I couldn't quote myself on it to be for sure.
We'll say tentatively that it's an Obama initiative, and it was, at least one of its goals was efficiency, but it was working with agencies cooperatively to work towards efficiency, not necessarily as an aggressive
digital efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Like to bring things out of the paper age into the digital age, essentially.
Yeah, which is one of the goals that DOGE.
But it wasn't designed. It wasn't designed to audit. It wasn't designed to have anyone fire anyone for no reason. I mean, ideally, if the technology got so good, there would be a reason to reduce the workforce, but that would still be under the purview of Congress. Well, I mean, between Congress and the heads of the departments.
And maybe the head of the executive, but we'll poke around to that one.
Not really, but I mean, we can poke there.
So, and section 3 of Article 2 ends with, "He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed and shall commission all the officers of the United States." So this kind of frames for me, like this is the end note of what the president is supposed to be. He's supposed to take the laws that Congress has published and apply them, and supposed to manage the executive branch.
So I believe faithfully is supposed to be doing some pretty heavy lifting in this statement, because it's designed to indicate that you are supposed to do it in the way that Congress says, not necessarily just, oh, hey, there's this department, let's change what it means. But since the Digital Service Department was designed to add digital interfaces, not remove departments, just in regards to DOGE, I feel like faithfully doing it's like when you look at the letter of the law and the intent of a law that is written by Congress. There's technicalities that you can get around, but then there's the faithful understanding and execution of that law, which is going in and trying to figure out what the actual intent of the law was. And then trying to do it based on what the intent of the law was. And then that interpretation technically goes down to the judicial department if people disagree with your interpretation of what that execution is.
And that is exactly what Donald Trump is pushing on, is he's using the letter of the law to progress the goals that he has advocated, but not necessarily in a way that is true to the spirit of the law or the intent of the law.
There we go. Spirit of the law. I was trying to think of that term earlier.
All right. So in considering the president's authority when it comes to firing and hiring people within the executive branch, one example we can look at is the Supreme Court Myers versus United States in 1926. A postmaster was fired by the president of the time, and Myers argues that his removal violated the 1876 Tenure of Office Act, which mandates that certain officers, including postmasters, could only be removed with the Senate's consent. The government countered that this restriction unconstitutionally infringed on the president's inherent executive authority under Article 2 of the Constitution. in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the United States, upholding the president's unilateral removal power. So this is one case where the Supreme Court actually sided on the side of the executive being able to remove people from positions in the federal government. There are other cases after this, but this was an interesting precedence. Any comments on that one, Chris?
Yeah, it's not really relevant so much anymore. Specifically with the postmaster, that's now overseen by a group of governors in the region that they are in. So he has some say over the postmaster general, but he can't actually even fire the postmaster general right now, which is why Biden couldn't fire DeJoy. So it's now under I don't remember the term for it, but like a cabinet of governors or some group of governors. So they kind of adjusted that, but so it makes enough sense. But through the time, they have essentially brought it down to where he can pretty much freely fire policy making or policy or politically appointed officers. So executive officers, which are like cabinet secretary, any of the people that work directly with him in the White House. For example, House of Staff, ambassadors, U.S. attorney, heads of executive agencies, and those things he can fire at will because they're appointed at will.
Gotcha.
But any of the other one, like pretty much everything underneath that policy level or political level appointee, there is certain types of due process that they're required to follow at this point. But yeah, so does it matter? Yeah, it's a precedent. But they've addressed. I don't remember when they addressed it, and they changed it to a like congruence of governors in insert region here. But yeah, now it takes a group of governors to be able to fire the postmasters, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Looking at Congress's powers, we can look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, and it goes on from there. But in Section 8, it talks about making laws and the power of the purse, or what was later interpreted as the power of the purse. So in reading the Constitution, it looks pretty clear that Congress is what creates a lot of these agencies. And so they approve funding, they approve the purpose, and they establish these institutions. And so it does come into question, even though the president is the manager, as it were, of these institutions, and he does have a degree of authority in how they're to execute their jobs. It does question if Congress is the ones who are establishing these institutions and their purpose. Is it within the president's purview to eliminate, downsize, or even redirect funds? And the answer so far has been no, I believe, in the discussions I've heard.
Yeah, I would venture to say mostly no.
Yeah.
But there are definitely times where they have tried. Which leads into, say, like the Nixon era with the Impoundment Control Act, where he tried to not seize, but limit the funding that was going out to certain agencies because he didn't like their procedural structure. I don't remember this very specific that caused it. But he was trying to stop funding certain agencies, and then Congress was like, nope, and made a law that was like, no, if we say you are funding it, you have to fund it.
Yeah.
And there are some stipulations, like there's a certain time frame that he can get away with not funding them under certain types of review. I think it's like I think it was like 45 days, but I think they've tried to adjust it down to a shorter period of time. I don't remember the specifics on that, but
Yeah,
I
I
know
think it
they
was
have
42.
So yeah, so I don't remember the specific number on the days, but there was some amount of time that there was more oversight from the president that they could put it down under review. But now I think there has to be very, very specific reasons given to Congress
Yep.
for it to freeze, or they can essentially get it turned back on pretty much either right away
Instantaneously.
or within like 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yep. That's the impression I had. Um, just so we're not saying that Trump is the only one that has tried this. I
Oh
I
no.
remember hearing about Biden when he was vice president, and there's a whole other controversy around this. But talking to Ukraine about firing that prosecutor, and if you don't fire him, we're not going to give you the money. Well, Congress, designated that money for that purpose. He is the vice president, part of the executive, was not in a position to be, withholding funds. But we can get further into that story on another episode.
Yeah, that's a deeper conversation.
All right. So another case to look at is Humphrey's Executive versus United States in 1935. Um, this person was confirmed by the Senate for a 7-year term, and the FTC Act specified that the commissioners could only be removed by the president for inefficiencies, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office. The justice argued that the FTC was a quasi legislative and quasi judicial body, not purely an executive agency, and that Congress intended its commissioners to serve a fixed term to ensure independence from the presidential control. And this is a really good example of why it is not purely a president is in charge of the executive branch and can do whatever he wants with the executive branch, because there are a lot of purposes that are intended for Congress to fulfill that they are using the executive branch to do. And so when they establish any kind of institution that is serving those roles, the president doesn't necessarily have carte blanche ability to erase or repurpose or redirect. Um, and so that is a good case for setting that precedence.
That particular uh, lawsuit also kind of indicates why they have like the 10-year terms for FBI directors so that they aren't held to the same political standards. So say, for example, if someone was investigating fraud and corruption in, say, the Trump administration, uh, they were not supposed to be able to be fired because they should be allowed to follow through with their investigations as
Mhm.
a independent, essentially not fully independent, but as an independent law or like law seeking or truth seeking apparatus that should not be applied to like the political whims of each government, each turnover of government.
So are there any other legal precedences that you think come into play here?
Um, so legal precedences might not be the right word, but so when we're specifically talking about DOGE, there I mean, there's certain protections that happen at different levels of employees in the federal government. And like as we already talked about, there's the executive officers, which Trump essentially has just whatever power to get rid of. So like the heads of departments and agencies. And those heads of departments and agencies are allowed to fire people, not necessarily at their leisure, but they have the authority where the president essentially can tell them, hey, you need to do this.
Yeah.
Or if you don't do this, I'll fire you.
Yeah.
That is something that is totally within the power of that structure. However, there are also more protected people underneath the political appointed executive officers, which, for example, people that have a harder time being fired on a whim are tenured civil servants, as noted by the tenure law that was referenced earlier, whistleblowers, any unionized federal employees, most general federal workers, such as IRS agents, Social Security admin, the people who actively try to keep things like, or that are the boots on the ground people for the departments, and postal service workers like that. I mean, there's more to it than that. Like there's people in the DOD that have somewhat protected positions because they don't really have authority to make game-changing decisions. They're just the oil that keeps the gears from grinding to a halt. As a position, I mean, to bring a really, really not that great metaphor into it, but it works well enough. And then there's different levels of protection that go for different people. And then even after that, as referenced earlier with the merit-based firings, there is a group of lawyers that are quasi part of the executive branch. I haven't really sussed this out very well. The OSC officer, the office or the special counsel agency, which is there to help protect federal workers from illegal firings or actions taken against them. Just today, they made a stay on six individuals that were fired across six different departments, which then has to go to the MSPB, which is what we were referring to earlier, which is the Merit Systems Protection Board. And the Merit Systems Protection Board is the board that actually goes through and checks to see if a merit-based firing is actually a merit-based firing or if it's just some kind of political stunt.
Gotcha.
So the OSC essentially made a legal statement saying, hey, these six people from these six different departments that were fired based on the statement of low or no or like minimal performance reviews or bad performance reviews, and they had exemplary performance reviews, but since to fire people you have to go through either the performance-based firings or you have to, like, because they're protected under certain laws, they are now trying to take that, and it seems like that might be setting a precedent since they only picked one from each department. So they're trying
test the
to,
waters.
well, if not test the waters, find out if the MSPB, which is also under the executive branch, has been ideologically captured at this point,
Yep.
or if they're actually going to try to follow the merit-based system that is on the laws, or if they're just going to be like, throw it out.
Yeah.
But also, if it does set that precedent, all of the other people that have similarly quality performance reviews, if they were laid off or fired, would have legal repercussions that or legal actions they could take back against the government, or they could get their positions back.
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest, and I am of the opinion that I believe that the executive should have greater authority when it comes to firing people within the executive branch. And I agree that there does need to be protections when it comes to those who are fulfilling a role specifically designated by Congress as far as not shutting down entire departments. But I think as far as downsizing and keeping departments functioning without messing with the budget, I think there's a good argument to be made that that is well within the intentions of the president as the executor. What do you think?
In principle, I understand what you're saying, because you want people who are in line with, say, the president's vision of the country. However, the president isn't the one that makes the laws. The president is not supposed to be wildly interpreting the laws separately than how they were written. They're just supposed to faithfully execute the laws as written. So if you're taking the argument that people need to follow the president and his desire, you are promoting a more authoritarian view of the presidency, which is very different than what constitutionally is directed toward having Congress be the people who define things, or the people's houses, are our representatives, and the president is essentially just supposed to be the manager that manages our voices, which our
Yeah.
voices are supposed to be represented through Congress. So just because you like the idea that the president should be able to do what he wants with this, I am okay with that. However, if you don't concede that that is a much more authoritarian take and it doesn't really follow the faithful execution of the laws, it's the my execution of what I think the law should be,
Hmm.
then I don't agree with that. Does
Okay.
that make sense? I might have worded
Yeah.
that poorly.
Yep. No, you're good. I think there's some more room for debate there because I believe that President Trump was elected by the people that have supported him
Yes, he was
specifically.
elected to be the executive.
Yes.
Just because our population doesn't know what the president does doesn't mean he should get special powers for it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But I think that how he manages the federal government actually is within his powers as long as he's not undermining the agencies and their intended role.
Which is exactly what he's trying to do and is pretty much what you just said you wanted to see him be able to do more.
Well, and what I said was I wanted him to be able to fire more people within those agencies, not necessarily shut them down or redirect their purposes or redirect their funding.
Fair,
So
but
you could do a great deal of downsizing and theoretically, well, and here's the example. I know that it
but you
frustrates.
still can't
Go ahead.
save money. But you still can't save money because that money was already allocated to it.
Correct. In
If
that
you're
first step.
choosing, but what? So here's my hot take on that whole idea. I do not agree that the president should have more authority to downsize the departments. I do think Congress needs to do their fucking job.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone
And
will get behind
and
that.
and yeah, and so when it comes down to that, I don't think just because we're annoyed that Congress isn't doing their job, I think we need to stop kidding, like putting in old dumb fogies that aren't doing their shit and actually vote all these dumb fuckers out. Sorry, I don't mean to swear so much, but uh, I don't have much faith in the 70, like the boomer class, like the old boomer class of politicians.
Yeah. For the
They
most,
very clearly
go ahead.
don't they're very clearly just comfortable in their positions and they're not actually doing their job.
Yeah, I agree
I think
wholeheartedly.
some of that is weaponized incompetence because we have some really they're either dumb or they are intentionally trying to mislead people about how much they do or don't do, or they're just corrupt as shit. But there's some people that don't even seem to know what the point of their departments that they're overseeing are.
Yep.
And like uh, since I'm the more left leaning of us, I'll attack the left on this one a little bit more. Dianne Feinstein, she didn't even remember she was sick the last few weeks of her life when she went back to Congress and was voting on shit. What the fuck are we thinking?
Yeah.
Why are we setting up situations like why do we have a voting structure or a party structure that is putting people into place that can barely like function?
Yep.
Uh, I wouldn't quite say the same on that for Biden. I don't think he's quite as brain dead as all of the like the right was trying to make it out to be.
I think it's
Because
pretty
he actually got
close.
it. Yeah, I mean, you can think that, but he got a whole lot of stuff actually accomplished. He just doesn't speak well in front of people. I mean, if we want to talk about like how poorly people speak, we can easily put Trump in that mix.
For sure. Well, I think that's an
He,
entirely different issue though.
yeah, yeah. I think it's both. I still think it's an issue. We'll just leave it
Yep.
at that.
Yep.
Um,
So I'm gonna put a proposal here together for you, and I want to get your reaction. So
Okay.
I'm gonna throw this idea out. I think that the 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 president as the executive should have more authority to fire people within the executive branch, specifically because the nature of government and the nature of Congress, it is very difficult for them to uh, get around the idea of downsizing government and getting their act together in order to do something. Even if you had better people in Congress, I still think that structure, that kind of committee kind of approach makes it very difficult to get to a place of, all right, we need to cut spending here. We need to downsize this department. We need to combine these two departments and downsize, whatever the case might be. And so that's why having an executive, like what Elon did with Twitter, because that is an excellent example, where you downsize and you increase and sometimes increase efficiency by doing so. So
Can I interject real quick before
yeah,
you get too far?
go for it.
So I kind of agree for corporations.
Hmm.
Actually, I completely agree for corporations. And here's why. This isn't my original thought. I can't remember the guy who I heard specifically say this, but if you're making a corporation that makes widgets or does a thing or like provides some arbitrary service, like the town hall structure, if it goes down for 4 months, nobody gets hurt, nobody dies. It's
Yep.
just a little bit less money in the coffers of the CEO or the person who owns it. Also, if he doesn't do a good job and he totally fails, like for example, if you're talking about like SpaceX, that's a type of company where you expect large failures because when
Yep.
you're trying to learn how to send off rockets and do really crazy new technical stuff, failures are built into the process. When it comes down to managing 300 million people or nearly 400 million people, little hiccups and not understanding what departments do, like for example when they fired the people from USAID that were doing Ebola research or Ebola funding.
Vaccine or okay.
No, they were actually like doing health services for Ebola patients and people, like, and it got shut down instantly.
Gotcha.
Because they're deciding to, instead of audit, which they're claiming they're doing, they're just saying turn it off and we'll figure out if we fucked up.
Yep.
But turning it off is also cutting off SNAP benefits. It's cutting off certain benefits for veterans and veteran aid. It stopped. It literally stopped trials for kids' cancer research. So like kids who were taking like drugs for cancer that are new drugs, so it can potentially get to market faster. All that funding got shut off, and they had to stop.
Yep.
And so, like again, it's a different type of repercussion, and it's a different type of thing that I do not think should be held under one person's political whim.
Yeah.
That's why I think we need to have a better structure in Congress that with people that are actually trying to accomplish things and not just, I don't even know what some of Congress is doing at this point. I'm not saying all of them. Like there are some people that are legitimately trying to do some like good, but there's also some people that are very clearly just, I think that the federal government is bad, and I said that and I got elected, so my entire goal is to not help the federal government do the thing. Because if I can help prove that the federal government is garbage, then I get what I want by just being an inept in Congress.
Yeah. And
I'm gonna say putting names out there for that, but there's a few of them that I'm pretty sure that's their entire intent. They just hired the dumbest person to get out there because, this adds a whole extra layer of who's funding the people to get in there. Is Citizens United okay? Because now we're essentially letting like very rich or large bodies of people just kind of put a bunch of money into some political ideological person without having them actually happen to campaign in any real way against other people. But yeah, that's a whole extra series of conversation. But if you can get people via money implanted that don't want the government to work at a federal level, all they have to do is sit there and say no to shit.
Yeah.
and they can make the government less efficient. However, there's an argument there that if we have a system that's set up to let that happen, maybe we need to change our system.
Well, and I
Uh,
think that we're set up that way intentionally. It's difficult things to get done, things done through Congress intentionally, so that only the ideas are only the theoretically only the best ideas and that have the greatest support among the people. Only those things actually get passed, and then everything else, it's nearly impossible to get it passed. And I think that's intentional, and that's again. I think your point is excellent. Yeah, I think your point is excellent, but I would still go back to saying that's why we have an executive. That's why we have a president, is to take on some of those things that form of government doesn't handle very well.
I think they would have wrote that into the Constitution if that were the case.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that that makes sense,
Yeah.
but that's also the argument why kings make sense.
Yeah, for sure. They're very efficient. If you have actually kings are great. If you have a king that is really good at managing and really knows what he's doing, excellent. Absolutely. But
Yeah, but he's never going to know. He's never going to know everything enough
yeah.
about everything. That's why.
Well,
That's
and
why our
even
federal government has 300 or like I don't know 2 million employees. I don't remember exactly
yeah,
what it
yeah.
is,
Something
but it's
huge.
like yeah, which I mean, arguably maybe more than we need. But
Yeah.
also, we do a lot of shit that most people don't understand we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
but
and there's people
even
who just argue that it's too big without actually knowing anything. Like again, one more example of the DOGE dummery is the firing a bunch of people in the Department of Energy, and then later finding out that the Department of Energy is who controls our nuclear stockpiles.
yeah.
And so they fired people, and for 3 days they were trying to find their personal information because they deleted their email contacts. And so they didn't know how to get a hold of people who have all of the working information about some of our nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It's like maybe we need to actually, I mean, again, we had auditors, but our Congress didn't do anything with the audit reports. So again, I see your point of maybe we need something to come in and shake things up. I just don't think that the going in the authoritarian monarch direction is the way to go currently.
Yeah.
I don't think we are quite that far over the cliff. However, I'm also going to say that I do think we need to figure out how to get some of our shit under control, like some of our debts and deficits, depending on your interpretation of how the monetary and financial system works. But so like we need to get better about a lot of stuff and we need to get more efficient on how we do certain things. However, there's also a lot of privacy concerns
Yeah.
about how we're doing stuff right now because we
Yeah.
have people that are actively getting personal information when they're auditing and or adjusting and or downsizing departments when they don't need personal information. They
Yeah.
don't need detailed admin access to these like certain databases like the Department of Education. They don't need detailed information about each person's loans or their social security numbers. It's like they don't need like the health records of like veterans that and the therapy records of veterans in the VA. Like they shouldn't be getting access to some of this stuff, but we have a very politically driven and like a loyalty driven executive officer line right now, which is just letting a non-elected person and a bunch of his interns come in and get access to things that they don't legally have access to get. And that's where most of the lawsuits are coming from right now against Doge is the fact that not necessarily that Doge is, I mean, well, it's really because of the politically appointed heads, they are being allowed into situations where they do not legally have access or shouldn't legally have access.
Yeah.
And again, we had auditors, but Trump fired them all. And
Yeah.
not only that, it's like the USA, like, I mean, you can go to US government spending and you can cross check all of the Doge savings and the fact that you can cross-check all of the DOGE savings on a website that's open to the public is a strong indicator that they're not finding anything new. We already had all the information, and it's in better detail on this website that was there before DOGE got there. People
Yep.
just didn't know that we were auditing it because there's people saying that we weren't auditing it.
So I'm gonna push on this idea a little bit more before we move on. Um, so I'm not suggesting that Trump should not, or that the president should not have limitations. But I am suggesting that for some functions, it does make sense to have an executive. And this is someone who was elected by the people. And so he's representative of the people, and he can't truly be a king because he's got 4 years. And then he's done,
For
which,
now,
yeah,
there,
well,
there's already,
and
there's, yeah.
and there can be talk about going and about a third term for Trump, but I can't believe that there's any way that he would get
No,
enough support behind that idea.
I think the military would step in, hopefully. But I don't know for sure.
I think a lot of people, both on the right and the left, would. Uh, yeah, at least I'd like to think so. Maybe I'm
I
naive,
would like
but
to think so too, but I mean, we're already doing a lot of stuff I would like to think that we wouldn't do. So
yeah. Well, and we're doing a lot of things that I want to do, but not necessarily the way that we're
yeah,
doing it.
I think it is fair to assume that everybody who has looked at the books at all, even if you don't even really understand them, especially if you don't understand them,
Yeah.
I would say it makes perfect sense that we need to make some pretty serious changes.
So let's look at specifically what DOGE is doing. They're doing audits, which has some issues as far as privacy and legality, as far as what they're supposed to have access to. We've talked about that a little bit. They're halting payments on things. And when I say DOGE is doing it, really it's Trump is doing it. And that's
Yeah,
why DOGE is able to do as much as it is because it's not making the calls themselves. It's making these, this giving this advice to Trump. This is what you should do based on what we're finding. And that's how they're exercising authority that seems so much larger than what a new department not confirmed by Congress should have.
yeah.
And then,
And technically, it's not a new department; it's just a
yeah,
renamed department with a few extra things on it. But yeah,
yep,
that's also how they're getting away with it, is because they
yes,
didn't make a new department.
yep,
They
for
just
sure.
changed a previous department that already had funding for digital improvements, and then they're adding this extra layer of a bunch of unpaid people. Uh, in theory, they're being unpaid, but a bunch of unpaid people that are going in and helping with the technology by getting random information that they don't necessarily need to be able to perform audits.
So, somewhat recently, Elon sent out an email requiring that every federal employee respond back with what was it, 5 bullet points of what they did the previous week. What's your take on that one?
The email didn't match the Twitter post, and I think that was intentional because one, Doge doesn't have the ability to fire anyone. Only the heads of the department, like so, of the civil servants, and they without. I don't know if they can actually make that type of claim anyway, where it's a if you don't respond, that is counted as a resignation. I don't think I'd have to look more into if you can if you can proclaim that somebody pre-proclaim that somebody else is resigning if they don't do something. I
Yep.
don't know. I don't know the legal
My
around
my
that.
in,
Because I don't think they've tried that before. So I
yeah,
don't know if
my
there's any technical rule against it.
my
But
impression is that they can't do that, or that that's not even really the intention, that it's just a tool to
that's
get
my
a rise and a response out of people.
so I think it's an attempt to try to get people to so I don't know. I really don't know if that was just a really incompetent move, they just didn't know certain protections, or they're just trying to find ways to get people, find excuses to fire people temporarily. Because if you can fire somebody, uh, then that means you're withholding their paycheck for a while.
Yeah.
And so they are with the potent or with intent to make a hostile work environment for these employees. There might be a final straw that will make certain people just give up. I think that might have been part of the intent, because Trump or Elon did say that why he did that was because Trump essentially didn't like that he hadn't got enough people fired or enough people to quit yet.
Yep.
And so they are definitely taking corporate tactics that are used pretty regularly in large corporations to try to get people to quit due to hostile work environment.
I think
And
there's a
that
couple
could
of,
have
go ahead.
and that could have been a tactic, like that could be part of that tactic, is to just make it so unpleasant and so chaotic that people just give up and leave. But also, luckily, a bunch of the departments are just like, yeah, this isn't something they can do. Don't do it.
Yep. So I think it was a win.
Yeah,
I think it was a
go for it. Sorry.
win-win. That's right. I think it's a win-win for Elon in general, because in addition to what you were saying, as far as encouraging people just to give up and resign, whatever, it also uh, gives them something to work with, as far as if they don't get a response. All right, that's someone that we need to take a closer look at. Or if you get a response that is not satisfactory as far as what they accomplished, okay, that's something we need to take a closer look at. If you get a response of, hey, me and my team, we did this, and knocked it out, then okay, we're green check mark. We don't need to cut there. So I even
Do you
even
think
if
anyone was actually? Sorry, I
go
don't
ahead.
mean to. Do you think anyone was actually going to read those emails? That's like 2 million people sending bullet point emails.
I think an AI was going to read those emails, but that'd be
Yeah,
my
I'll say,
guess.
but how would the AI know what's an appropriate job, or like what's an appropriate answer to that?
Yeah, it might know enough to at least categorize and then
Yeah,
can be reviewed thereafter. Don't know. It's a good question.
yeah, I said, yeah, no, that's why I was like I don't know. I think it's just toxic workplace. I mean, again, that's my theory,
Yeah.
but because again, it's like if you have that many emails of just bullet points, what they also were probably trying to do is find people that said things like, because there's banned words for funding that they implemented. So, like, if you use the term female or trans or equity or not equality, but equity is one of the words that you can't use in like anything that is being federally funded at the moment. So, if they used any of those keywords, they were probably going to try to get flagged because they're trying to make those words like the naughty words.
So I'm going to put some theories out as to why Trump and Elon are doing this very aggressive, very constitutionally and legally questionable approach to gutting the government. I suspect it's because they don't think that they would be able to achieve what they want to achieve on the scale and at the pace that they want to, or feel like they need to, going through the traditional channels. And so I don't like that. I like their goals. I like downsizing the government, but I don't like stepping outside of the constitutional norms. And I'm not speaking of constitutional norms as in what they're doing is technically unconstitutional. I'm saying that it is outside of the norms that we have established through tradition in serving these same purposes as far as auditing and so forth. One of the biggest issues I have is with transparency and accountability. We have been told by Elon and by others within the DOGE realm that they are going to be super open and share everything, and that Elon's going to recuse himself when it comes to anything that would affect his businesses and business interest. But we don't have any oversight. We don't have any transparency. We don't, and that's why going outside of the norms bothers me, because um, if we were to go through the traditional agencies and tools for doing this exact same thing, we would have the transparency and we would have the accountability. So I'm pretty sure you're not going to have any disagreement there.
Since Congress is essentially, I mean, it's not super majority by the Republicans, but they have all three layers, like tiers of the House, the Senate, and the executive.
Yep.
So if they don't want to, they're not going to say, "Hey, we're going to do the oversight that we're supposed to do because we like what you're doing," which that is problematic to me as well. That they're just deciding not to do the thing that they're supposed to be doing. But again, I think we, yeah, say I think we've been captured by the two-party system and we need to get away from it. But
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree with that.
I think that's closer to the we got to get Congress working, and we can't just have an authoritarian structured form, because if we let the authoritarian structure form, even if, like, say for example, you like some of the stuff they're doing, you're not going to like some of the stuff that the next president does if we decide to say fuck it and go back hard left.
Agreed.
And so
Agreed.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I might like that more if it's a good left person.
Yep.
But I don't think I'm not an authoritarian leftist.
Yep.
I am a very democratic style lefty.
Yeah.
And yeah, or representative democracy. I mean, it depends on how accurate you want me to be on that. But yeah, and
Yeah.
saying leftist may be pushing a little bit too far.
So to kind of close out the discussion of DOGE, I like the goals. I am libertarian. I like I said in the previous podcast, I would love to see the federal government gutted as far as its power and spending is concerned. Um, just as you mentioned, I don't like the idea of a president having too much power and authority. And I would agree that Trump, in combination with DOGE, is pushing those boundaries in ways that are not technically illegal, as far, well, it hasn't been established as illegal or unconstitutional, but is pressing those boundaries in a way that some of these issues should be brought up to the Supreme Court so that we can better define where those boundaries are. I do believe that the president, as the executive, should have more authority to clean house as far as the executive branch. I think that the executive branch is more structured in a way that is more apt to make those kinds of calls effectively rather than Congress. Congress is good at building. I think that the executive should be good at cleaning house within boundaries, not without restriction. So I am concerned with the precedence of Trump pushing so hard against constitutional and legal norms, and what that could mean if that's not held in check. If our government and our judicial system actually does hold Trump accountable and keep him from crossing certain lines, I think that could actually be even healthier. Those boundaries being more firmly established. So yeah, any other closing thoughts that you have as far as DOGE is concerned?
I like the idealistic point of view of what DOGE is doing, but the evidence doesn't seem to agree with what they are saying they're doing. And it feels like like what the most recent claim I remember reading was that they were up to like 68 billion or like 58 billion in savings. But if you actually look at the breakdown of all of it, some of them were decimal point errors. Some of the contracts were already partially paid out. Some of them were canceled back under the Biden era. So they didn't really get anywhere near that. The nearest estimate that I've seen, again, I haven't gone through all the numbers, but I have double checked some of the bigger claims, that it seems like it's closer to about 2.8 billion, and not 58 billion. And that was like, I mean, I guess it was early this last weekend. I think Friday, this last time I looked at it. So it might be up since then. But so they are finding things, but I don't know if they're finding anything that wasn't already shown by the inspector general. And I think so, to add on to your point about why you think, or the theory that you had about why you think they're being so hard right off the bat for the first like 100 or so days. Uh, I think that it's actually, I mean, I added the 100 or so days. You didn't add that number, I don't think. But uh, I think it's actually because if you track history, the most changes that people are able to get done before Congress and people get organized is all done in the first 100 days.
Yep.
And so I think that they intentionally were trying to hit the ground running. I think they were expecting to essentially blitzkrieg as much of the stuff as they could through, and then hope that they win a bunch of the court cases.
Yep.
But so I think that they know that a bunch of the stuff they're doing is not in line with the Constitution, if not unconstitutional. So it's like I don't trust the words that they're saying because they don't match the numbers. So I don't know what the overall intentional goal is for some of this stuff, but I know what they're saying is not matching what they're doing.
And I think even if their goal is to cut in order to save our economy and our debt, it's not going to work by itself. We could totally gut the federal government. Well, not totally. We could cut the vast majority that isn't defense, that isn't Social Security, and we would still be in big trouble just staying on course the way we are now. So we would have
they're
to
cutting
do some,
Social Security too.
yeah. So we would have to make some significant changes in how we work our economy in order to get us out of this economic mess. So I anticipate that we're go ahead.
There isn't a way to do this without redistributing wealth.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying
Yeah.
like steal from the rich or blah blah. I mean, guys, if you think taxes are theft, then it's
Yes.
going to end up being stealing from someone.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, that's a whole extra weird philosophy that I don't buy into.
Yeah. I don't entirely agree with it, but I love the sentiment.
Yeah, I love like what's the term? Slogans. I love slogans too.
Yep. Yep.
But the slogans are to make you feel good, not to make you think.
Well, they can, but yeah, that one falls short.
So some make you think, but most of
Yeah.
them are to not make you think
Yeah.
and just to make you feel good.
Yep.
But so I don't see how we can't restructure the tax policy and not get this done. But also we can't, like, we need to grow the middle class, not just the top 1%, because
Yep.
the top 1% is so good at not paying taxes.
Yeah.
There is a group of people who've got the runaway train and just are super far beyond what they are contributing to society.
Yeah.
They just are
I
owning society.
yeah. I hope I am wrong, but I suspect that the only way out of this is a hard crash and reset. I just I
Or guillotines.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I
And
want to
that's
avoid.
where we're angling.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean, that's one of the core reasons why I started this podcast, is because that is exactly what I want to avoid. All right, let's move on to a Trump tweet. So Trump on February 15th sent out this tweet. He who saves his country does not violate any law. This is a quote attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, right? Yeah,
Yeah, I believe so.
So, yeah, this is very much a ends justifies the means kind of thing to me, which I don't I don't like.
It could be a
Um,
dog whistle too. Not like a racist dog whistle, but a dog whistle for the people that are claiming to be patriots, like the Jan 6 folk and like the more militaristic, militia style anti woke folk. It could easily be a way to try to rile them up as well. I think it is more. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I do think it's more of a an ends justify the means tweet. Except
mhm.
I also think that it meant that he knows he's going to be going into a bunch of court cases, and he doesn't think that what he's doing is illegal because he's trying to save America,
Yeah.
whatever that means.
Well, and let's look at the precedents for that because he's not entirely wrong. It's the same concept of history being written by the victors. So, in our past, there have been times where we have absolutely violated our Constitution. One of our most highly acclaimed presidents, Abraham Lincoln, suspended habeas corpus and arrested several members of Congress. Um, and it just blatant violation of the Constitution. Um, I realized there were some good motivations there. Trump has some good motivations. Uh, was that the moral thing to do? I don't. It's difficult to say because I wasn't alive during that time and I don't understand all of the circumstances. But yeah, I'm not comfortable with that one either. But it happened. We still revere Lincoln. Nobody arrested him. Somebody killed him, but
Yeah, I
nobody
was gonna
put
be like,
nobody put him behind bars for violating the Constitution. How does
yeah,
that
he
how does that
did.
apply with Trump?
So he also suspended, and I might have my like information a little bit off, but he did that during the Civil War, and he arrested people from the opposing army, like the seceded
Yeah,
army that
yeah,
claimed they were no longer part of America.
yes,
So did he really violate habeas corpus if they seceded?
yeah. I think so.
Well, I mean, yeah, but technically if they were claiming they were no longer part of America,
But
were
technic,
they? Were
but
they a
technic.
foreign army? Were they a foreign entity? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, again, I agree. Like they were because they weren't legally allowed to secede. That's why we sent the armies at them. But they had a whole separate army that they were fighting with, and the people that he was arresting were not just like, "Oh, I don't like the war." They were people trying to vote against uh, the Union fighting the war against the South
yeah.
when there was already a civil war that had started. So again,
So tech.
that's a really muddy water situation for me. I agree. He did bypass or he did suspend part of the Constitution, but when you have an invading army, even if it's from your own soil, trying to take over the country and change the dynamic of the country, is that wartime emergency powers, or is that just a blatant violation of the Constitution? He did suspend habeas corpus, but I was like, I don't know. I don't know enough to know how I feel about that specifically.
Yeah. Two
I
points I
actually
would.
I'm going to look into that more. Yeah.
Yeah. 2 points I would make on this. One, Trump and Elon are technically not violating the Constitution now. So if you want to talk
Yeah.
about technicalities, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. The other point I would make is there are many on the right who feel like this is on the same level ish as Civil War kind of urgency in trying to save the country. And so from some people's perspectives, similar justification, similar level
So
of urgency.
so I mean I see your point, but people's feelings are not the same as an invading army. Like that's kind of a like
Yeah.
the extreme difference there. It's like that's the equivalent of like the left being like, hey, we're going to suspend or we're going to violate or push into the Constitution because we think uh, that we think that like, hey, let's go back to the green energy and like the global warming. It's like we're going
Yeah.
to suspend the Constitution because the emergency of global warming.
Opportunity to move on to the next segment, which is birthright citizenship.
This
So
was so much
Trump,
easier.
yeah, I don't know that I entirely agree, which might make it for a good conversation. So let's see. Uh, what is it? Is it the 13th amendment? Which I'll see. I didn't write good notes on this one.
I'm trying to
Which
grab my
which
notes too.
which amendment or yeah, which amendment was
14th.
it? 14th? All right,
Yeah,
so
I
the
can read it real quick if you
yeah,
want.
go for it.
All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
So let's start off by looking back in history and what initialized this amendment. So we fought the Civil War, and we overcame slavery, or was I guess in the process of, and we had all of these black people who were arguably, and people were arguing that they weren't citizens and didn't have rights. And so the original, in my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that the original law read something to the effect of all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, uh, excluding Indians not taxed, are citizens. And then that later was built on to create the amendment that was the intention was we had all of these people who were living here, who were part of our country, we weren't calling them citizens. They didn't have the same level of rights. And so by creating this amendment, we said, you're all citizens. You're all part of our country, all part of our country. Great move. Now we're moving into the modern age where we have people who are visiting the United States from foreign countries, having children, or immigrating, seeking asylum, coming into the United States, having a child, and that child is now an American citizen. I would argue, looking at the reading of this, let's see, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And this has been an argument that has gone back and forth, and it's already been argued. And as far as I can see,
Failed in court every time.
yep, it's failed, and they have judged. The court has said that jurisdiction counts as far as people coming from other countries and visiting and having a child. I disagree. I think that jurisdiction means that they're part of our legal, they're a resident here. They're part of our legal, we're legally accountable for them. If people who are visiting or who are seeking asylum or here illegally, I don't think any of those circumstances count as under our jurisdiction.
So the argument there is the intent of this wording is that so if you have foreign diplomats that are citizens of another country,
Yep.
And are only here in the state capacity of the other country, and they have a kid here, their child is not under our legal jurisdiction. They are under the jurisdiction of their state.
Yeah.
Because they are here as a diplomat. Same thing is we do not have jurisdiction over invading armies. So if an invading army comes into our territory and they have kids here, those are not citizens of
Yeah.
America. Other than that, those are, as far as I know, the only real exceptions to that, uh, the jurisdiction thereof when they're talking about the jurisdiction. I understand your argument, but multiple people have tried to use that argument, and even from the very beginning, the people who made the amendment, or and the judicial system have essentially not agreed with your interpretation of that.
Yep. That's the impression
And
I was under, but I disagree.
yeah, well, I mean, it's just because you don't like a law
Yeah.
doesn't mean
Well,
it's how it is.
and look at it from a practical perspective, like morally speaking, practically speaking, how does it make sense to just automatically give citizenship to someone who, of no fault of their own, but was born here because their parents wanted to make them an American citizen? So they come here seeking asylum, they come here illegally, they come to visit under a visa. Under what reasoning does it make sense that we would just give citizenship to someone who was born here that way? That doesn't make sense to me.
There's a lot of laws that don't make sense to me. Doesn't change the fact that the law is as it's written. I mean, like, no, I'm not trying to downplay or like kill that thought process, but it's a yeah, I'll say, what's a good example? If you take birthright citizenship out as a whole, you also take you and my citizenship and make it suspect as well, because we're citizens only because we were born here. Two other citizens, but that isn't a prerequisite to be a citizen here. And so, since they didn't define it as a prerequisite that excluded you from citizenship, if you are born here and you are under our jurisdiction, which is, we've had this conversation similar to this before, which I asked you something to the extent of, do you think that even if you are not a citizen, you have due process rights here?
Yeah.
If you
Which is
have due
different.
process, yeah, but if you have due process rights here, you're under our jurisdiction.
I would disagree with that. I think it's
I
a
mean,
shared jurisdiction because there's another
shared with
country,
who?
the country of origin.
Who says that there? I mean, there's situations where other countries have disappeared when people were in our airports. Like they stopped being countries.
Yeah. No, that's a valid point. I
And
would say back to your point on being born here, as far as you and me and our citizenship, because our parents are citizens, we do come under the jurisdiction of the United States. Whereas
yeah,
someone who comes from another country, it's not clearly just our jurisdiction because they're still owned is the wrong
are
word,
they
but they're
sub?
still
Yeah,
owned, they're still subject to their country of origin. So
yeah.
that's where the
Are they?
jurisdiction comes in
Mm,
for me. And like
they.
even like
That's
why wouldn't we
that's an
interpret the law?
interpretation.
Yeah, but why wouldn't we interpret the law that in a way that makes the most practical sense? When you could look at jurisdiction,
Practical for who?
practical for the United States, for the
I mean,
for citizens, for
why would having newly born citizens in our country, which almost always improve our GDP and help the overall economic structure and like the structure of our country, like why would we not want more citizens?
yeah, we totally want more citizens. That's not the argument. It's not that we don't want more citizens. It's just
But
that
that
we
would be
don't
the
want.
practical argument.
Well, no, not necessarily because we don't want it to be an automatic thing just because you're born here when your parents came from somewhere else. That's not the practical approach to gaining citizenship in my mind.
What do you mean by practical approach?
if we are going to be giving citizenship to people that wouldn't otherwise have citizenship, just because your parents came here and gave birth to you here isn't a practical reason to be giving someone citizenship. Now, if now you and I have
I don't know
talked.
if we're using the same term of practical. I feel like practical is doing some kind of weight for you there that I don't understand the point of the word in that scenario.
Okay, trying to think if I can reword it somehow. So to me, it does not make practical sense to have an immigration system, meaning having a way of gaining citizens that is based on your parents coming here and giving birth to you. It doesn't seem practical to me as because it's having that the determining factor doesn't seem practical. Having other determining factors, whether it be qualifying through now, and you and I have spoke on this, and I hope I totally agree that we need to rework our immigration system. I want immigrants, but it needs to be through a system that makes sense. And having someone gain citizenship just because they were born here from parents who tried to come here specifically to have that child so they'd be a citizen, that doesn't make sense to me. That there's no merit there. There's no it's without reason in my opinion. It's there's no value or reason to why we would have that the tool of gaining more citizens. It should be through merit. It should be through legitimate asylum. There are plenty other measurements by which I am open to having new citizens. Having someone just born here from parents who came here specifically to take advantage of that, that doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, I understand that it doesn't make sense to you, but again, that's the law. I don't
Well, and
necessarily have. Yeah, I'll say
that's the problem.
I.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and I understand, but it's like in that case, change the amendment. Uh, I like I not I was like, but that is a part of our Constitution. It's something that we've held to for a long time. Uh, and people have kind of disliked it, but that was worded in a very specific way. And it was I don't remember like we are also not the only country that has if you're born here, you're a citizen here type laws like birthright citizenship. We're not an exclusive group to have made that law, and it wasn't just for slavery. Like the original writing was different than this, but they changed it to this for a reason. I don't know the specific reason, or if they wanted it to be more inclusive, or if it was because, say, we still hadn't, done the Louisiana Purchase yet, and they're like, well, all these people that are potentially going to be born here to people that technically weren't American citizens should have a path to citizenship if we're going to be taking over this large swath of land. I don't remember the specific. I don't know
Yeah.
the
Well, our
specific.
immigration system was totally different back then because travel was so much harder. And we were looking for as many immigrants as we could get. So it makes total sense for that time that that they would want just you take the time to travel all the way here and you want to be a part of what we're doing, we'll take you. But nowadays we can't take everyone. Like we cannot physically cannot take everyone who wants to be an American citizen. There's no way. And so we have to have some kind of limitation. So if we're going to have limitations, why are we accepting and so yeah, I've already
Then
made
we
my
need to
my
change the
but
law.
yeah, and but the thing is we make different interpretations of laws all the time that people argue back and forth. So what my argument is when we're talking about jurisdiction, why are we making the judgment on what jurisdiction means in this case in the way that is disadvantageous to us, that doesn't make sense as far
I
as,
I
go ahead.
don't agree with the interpretation that it's disadvantageous.
Mhm.
That like
So,
so when you were making the practical thing, it's like I think we have a shortage of people, specifically shortage of kids. We have an elder population that is far outpacing our birth rate.
mhm,
So we don't have a particularly great structure or enough people to support our growing elderly population. So
yeah,
we need a ton more people because our birth rates have slowed down to like 1.1 per person, and for us to sustain our healthcare system for the elderly, it needs to be about 2.2 per family.
yeah,
So it's like we need more immigrants because we are not birthing enough people. So
yeah.
your practical argument doesn't make sense to me because practically we need the people.
Yeah. I don't think it's practical to make that decision based on people coming here of their own volition to have children here. I think we need to have
Swap
different
practical for
measurements.
logical, and I'll agree with
Okay.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
Because practical is like a utilitarian argument, and the
Gotcha.
utilitarian argument is yes, we need more people.
Yeah.
How we get those people is arguable, but from a logical point of view, or like something like that, I can see where your point is a lot more than a practical. So
Gotcha.
I didn't mean to cut you
Gotcha.
off
No,
there,
that's fine. No, that's fine.
but I was struggling to comprehend your intention there because I didn't want to like misinterpret it. But logical, I think, is closer to what you
Yeah.
were shooting for there.
So for instance, let's say, I don't know, some foreign country. Some country that, well, let's not even name a specific country. Let's say there's a major country out there who has a culture that is kind of incompatible with American principles and constitutional principles. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want a world that has diverse culture and uh, diverse forms of government. But you know, if you're going to be part of the United States, I'd prefer you to be kind of adopting into those same values. But let's say we have a couple 100,000 people come over and have babies over the next, 10 or 20 years in the United States, um, that are from this culture and from that isn't really the American kind of culture. And they come in and kind of make their own, their own space that isn't really part of what America is. And, you know, so that's the new immigration program. So I don't like that outcome. I want people who want to be American in the fullest meaning of that word. And that's going to be, I don't know if we can get into that conversation because that's a
Yeah,
deep one. Um,
that's also it's so vague. It's not. It doesn't mean anything until we get into it more.
yeah, yep, agreed. So I don't know. I'm kind of talking around the issue, but I don't understand why, because it does make sense to me to have the interpretation of jurisdiction as in they're not our citizens. Why would they have rights even though they're not
So
part of our country, and not a citizen, but that doesn't
do
mean
you,
they're in our jurisdiction as far as it's like look at jurisdiction the way we use it as far as a city cop being outside of the city and trying to make an arrest outside of their jurisdiction.
yeah, they can arrest anyone in their jurisdiction. Which, if you're born in the jurisdiction, you're in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, but if they're
That's a
outside of their
territory.
yeah, but if they're outside of their jurisdiction,
They're not outside of their
no,
jurisdiction.
I'm saying, but
They're
if they
in
are,
our jurisdiction.
yeah, but if they step outside of their jurisdiction, then they're limited. They can't do all the same things. So same thing for someone coming from another country. Their jurisdiction is back the their
Yeah, but
the
the
jurisdiction.
kids is not. The kid has no jurisdiction. The kid has no birth certificate in the other country. The kid has no tie to the other thing.
Oh, I see
So
what you're saying.
yeah, so you're indicating that they are like so for example, if they were part of a system that they were trying to get away from,
Yeah.
you would then be like, "Oh, so this kid is now subject to the sins of his parents' birthplace."
Well, I don't know that it would be sins. It's just,
Well, I mean, I was using the terminology like the sins of your
yeah,
parent. It just popped into my head that way. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
no, the unfortunate fact that their parents were born in a spot means that you are now anchored to that spot forever, or are you anchored to the jurisdiction in which you were born? Because
I
if
think,
if they don't go back there with the kid and claim the kid in that country, that kid is not a citizen of that country.
mm,
That kid does not have citizenship innately just because parents in a different area had them.
so you're saying that parents from Spain,
Yeah,
came here and had a child, went back to Spain, that child would not have citizenship in Spain?
I don't specifically know Spain's laws to know that if their kid is born, like, so I'd have to look at their state's laws, but there isn't a guarantee.
Yeah. But that's the way that it makes sense to me for it to work.
Yeah, I mean, logically I see your point because like you're essentially, I mean, I'm going to word this in not the best way, and by that I mean I know it's going to be offensive to some people, um, but you're essentially indicating that the child is property of the parents and not
Mhm.
his own person. That is now like say in America, you have the God-given right or like whatever, like I mean God-given, I mean yada
Yeah.
yada. I don't we don't have to play that game. But the are the rights given by the parents uh state of birth or like where they're from, or are the rights given by America
So,
within the jurisdiction of America?
and this is how I view jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is responsibility. So
Juris
parents have responsibility for their child. Countries have responsibilities for their citizens. So other citizens from another country coming over here and being born here, I would argue, not our responsibility, not our jurisdiction, not in that sense. They can be legally protected because we have a constitution that believes in human rights. And so we give certain rights to people, even visiting from without the country, outside of the country. But I would argue the country of origin holds responsibility for those individuals and for that child. And so that's what jurisdiction means to me.
I do not think that that's what it means to the Supreme Court or the people who wrote the
Apparently not, but it should.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, just because you
I
want
know.
it to mean that doesn't mean that it's true.
Yep.
But I mean, again, logically, I see where you're coming from, but I I don't have the same issue. Like, so for example, uh, there's also kind of a painful side effect of this that could potentially happen, which is if a baby is born here, to well, I mean, I guess I mean, we could bring up the lawsuit that I know that you made a note about, which is the United States versus Wong Kim Ark,
Yep.
uh, who uh, was born here to Chinese parents, and they went like at one point he went back overseas, and when he came back with his American citizenship, because he had American citizenship as per uh, the birthright citizenship of the 14th Amendment. When he came back, they intentionally made lawsuits and like arrested him at the border and tried to deport him because they wanted to see if it would hold up as precedent.
Mhm.
Uh, because it had held up, but they hadn't really actively tried to challenge it through the courts yet.
Yeah.
And so when they did that and they challenged it through the courts decided that the law was written clearly as it needed to be for him to have citizenship in America. And I I can see your logical argument, but the legal argument is until we change it,
Yeah. Well, we've legally, taken to court interpretations of laws and changed them before. I think we should do it here.
I don't know if I agree because I don't think there's a good practical reason to do it.
Yeah. So
I
we'll agree to disagree
yeah,
there. And
like
yeah,
again,
that's
logically I see your point,
yeah.
but it's a yeah, it doesn't grant parents the citizenship. It doesn't mean that when they leave that they're not going to take their kid. Uh, it doesn't mean a lot of stuff. But uh, if by chance, say, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a complicated one. It's a hard one to decide. I would have to try to dig more into some of the history as to try to figure out if there's any writings on why they wrote it that specific way.
Yeah.
Other than like the fact that it was definitely clearly to help with the people trying to indicate that slaves who were not technically citizens when they were first here, when they were freed, were
Yep.
they really citizens of the United States at that point? I do understand that that was at least one of the base contexts of it, but I feel like uh, they would have written it differently if they wanted it to mean something different, because the jurisdiction thereof within the context of what they were saying then was both territorial and under the judicial code of, or under following the judicial rules of that area.
Hmm.
And so both of those things indicate that if you are under the protection of this judicial system when you're born, technically that just kind of is what it is. I mean, and
Yeah.
again, I think there's a just as much of an art. I mean, not just as much, but I don't necessarily think. Well, what's another way to put it? I think it's particularly difficult to leave certain countries as citizenship, or like it's hard to give up your citizenship in some countries just because you were born there. So
Hmm.
being able to get citizenship just because you were born there doesn't really hurt my feelings. Like
Yeah.
if you try to leave America and give up your citizenship, you have to like make sure you pay down like all your taxes and bills. So if you were born in a poor family and you got into debt before you realized you wanted to not be a part of this system, you're stuck in this system until you pay off a bunch of shit.
Yep.
And it's very, and so that was by no means other than the fact that you were born here. So it's like I don't know if I see a huge difference there, other than are you your own human being or are you tied to the exclusive uh, situations by which your parents brought you into existence? And so if we're talking as an individualistic country and like we are all individuals and we are not tied to the anchors of our parents, then I totally understand the 14th Amendment and it doesn't hurt my feelings at all. Uh, However, if we are assuming that we are essentially like legal property of our parents, then that's a different story. Because if we're treating humans like property and then states own humans like property, then I understand your argument that, say, Spain owned the parents. So if they owned the parents and the parents owned the kid, seems like by inheritance, Spain would own the kid as well.
Yep.
I mean,
And
I know
I think
that
it's
I'm
about,
simplifying those terms down, but
yeah, I would say it's responsibility rather than ownership.
so okay, so responsibility. I mean, I guess we did just only use ownership once, but yeah. So under the responsibility of, but again, if you take under the responsibility of, you have due process rights within the jurisdiction of America just for being a person,
Hmm.
not for being a citizen. So if you're born in under the jurisdiction, it's not saying everyone here. It's just if you're born under the jurisdiction, you're a
Hmm.
citizen, which is kind of the same rule that makes it so you and I, who were born here under our parents, uh, are citizens here. It just
Yeah.
happens to be that we had American parents where other people didn't. So it's like there is a difference. I just don't know when you're making make believe like citizenship is being arbitrarily tied to a system that you were born into without choice. And so I don't have that big of an issue with a slightly different arbitrary ruling that if you're born into it versus born to parents of it, that it should really change or needs to change the the meaning of like how you're a citizen.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a valuable conversation,
Yeah,
because I think
I could look into it more.
yeah, I think there are people who have perspectives on both sides of that who could hear this discussion and kind of gain some perspective on both sides. So I think that's an excellent conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I jumbled my words a bit, but yeah.
Yep, yep, good. No worries. Yeah, we're both kind of new at this, so we'll muddle our way through. So a couple of thoughts for our audience as we wrap things up. What points have we missed? Is there any parts that we've talked about that we're missing information on that you'd like to clue us in on? Yeah, leave a comment. Let us know. I intend to have reoccurring conversations on the same topic with different guests over the years, so that we can compile a lot of different perspectives on the same topics. And so your contribution to pointing us in the right direction on things that we're missing would actually be helpful. Um, so on that note, what are your thoughts, audience, as far as Trump violating the Constitution? Is he violating the Constitution? Is DOGE violating the Constitution, either in spirit or in reality? Do you agree with either Chris or me, or do you have a completely separate view? And again, are we missing anything? Um, and then, even if Trump is flirting with the lines, we'll say, on constitutionality and legality, is that justified? Are you ends justify the means, or are you morality first and foremost? And that's not always an easy question to answer.
They're also
Eh,
not
Go
mutually
ahead.
exclusive. They're also
Yeah.
not mutually exclusive. Sometimes
Yep.
breaking the law is actually the moral thing to do.
Yep. I would agree.
Um, but that doesn't mean it's not illegal.
Yep.
That's why nonviolent civil disobedience still leads a bunch of people beat up by the cops and put in jail.
Yep. Yep. So as you're making comments and having discussions, please make sure you are addressing the issues and addressing the ideas, and not trying to demonize people either individually or by group. That builds walls. And what this podcast is about is breaking down those walls and building bridges. So when you make your arguments and share your thoughts, please do so in a way that is addressing the ideas, not demonizing people. Any closing thoughts?
I feel like I almost want to clarify my stance on if I think Trump is actually violating the Constitution, which I think you dabbled at it, but I don't know if we ever just straight up said it, which is I don't right now, other than the 14th Amendment, I do think he's just violating that with his executive order, um, with the birthright citizenship. But as per DOGE, we are in such a gray area because he took a previously existing department, renamed it, and then slightly reshuffled its criteria, or like its mission statement.
Yeah.
So it was a department that already had funding and already was working towards some amount of digital efficiency and usability efficiency, and they extrapolated that into something wildly different, and then obfuscated who was in charge of it, and then just recently put an acting director in charge of it, but they still haven't got a Senate confirmed person, all while saying that Elon was in charge of it. And that whole structure is, like you said, flirting with the edge of constitutionality. I would say slamming into it with a sledgehammer,
Yeah.
just to see if they could get through it.
Yeah.
Technically, I don't think that they're violating the Constitution with DOGE. Well, I think some of the actions of DOGE are violating laws and some of the Constitution, but I don't think DOGE itself is technically unconstitutional.
Gotcha. I
But it
think
is
you and I,
definitely right on the edge.
yeah, I think you and I are in a very similar place as far as our assessment of DOGE and its constitutionality. I think the bigger difference is I'm more emotionally and psychologically attached to the idea of what DOGE is trying to do than you are. Um, and you're actually not entirely opposed to eliminating waste and, you know, addressing any kind of, you know, fraud or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
I'm just more emotionally invested in that outcome than your
Well,
worldview is.
well, it's not that you're emotionally invested in it more than me. You're just willing to accept ends justify the means more in this scenario, even if it goes wildly against what like our system of government's designed to be structured around.
Yeah,
And by
I
that I
would
mean,
go ahead.
by that I mean, uh, I think we have an utter failure in our Congress.
Yeah, agreed.
But our utter failure in our Congress, I do not know if that justifies giving like leaning into an authoritarian structure of power from an individual executive, which is not supposed to have that level of power. Because that is a slippery slope that is the equivalent of how every other authoritarian government comes into power. And they do it through the means of convincing people that there's a whole lot of fraud, a whole lot of waste. Like, I mean, that's kind of how, if I recall correctly, Mussolini wiggled his way in. That's essentially how Hitler wiggled his way in. Uh, and he came in and within like 3 months and changed, used the Constitution within the realm of the Constitution to dissolve the Constitution and put himself at the top of the government,
Yeah.
of the new government, which was then when he came in as part of the Workers' Party, and then as part of a populist movement because of economic problems that they were dealing with, partially due to vast wealth inequality, which, to be completely honest, I think that is the root of our issue. And that is what is leading to a majority of these extra issues is the mass wealth inequality. And so I think we are falling prey in this scenario to the authoritarian tendencies of the ultra rich in a society trying to make sure that they can stay at the pinnacle of the power structure in our society. And I think they use populism as a way to justify some of their actions, even if it is at the expense of the same people that are agreeing with them.
Yeah. So on the note of the
Sorry.
ultra wealthy, no, you're good. So on the note of the ultra wealthy, I think that's going to be our next episode. We're going to be discussing tax policy. Tim Pool, recent to this recording, had a debate with one of his employees about taxing the rich and tax loopholes for the rich. It was a rather heated discussion, and there were some interesting points made. So Chris and I are going to review that section of Tim's show and see if we can't generate our own discussion to build off of, and kind of mull over the question of, are we taxing the rich enough? Are there loopholes that they're taking advantage of? Is that unjust? What kind of tax system should we be under? We'll be talking around that issue next episode. We'll hope you'll join us for episode number 3. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us.